The most important finding was that participants resorted to nuclear weapons when they thought they were losing the conventional war. This happened most frequently with the China team as their invasion of Taiwan faltered due to lack of supplies. Hi, I'm Mark Kansian, a retired Marine Colonel and Senior Advisor at CSIS, and I'm here to talk about my report with Matthew Kansian and Eric Hegenbotham, Confronting Armageddon, Wargaming Nuclear Deterrence and Its Failures in a U.S.-China Conflict over Taiwan. Well, let me start with the bottom line. We developed and ran a war game 15 times to simulate a U.S.-China conflict over Taiwan where both sides could use nuclear weapons. Nuclear use occurred most often when the Chinese invasion of Taiwan began to fail, and China teams tried to restore their fortunes with nuclear weapons. Even in these extreme circumstances, the United States could achieve favorable outcomes, but these required face-saving off-ramps for China. Total victory is not possible when both adversaries have nuclear weapons. We did this study because the stakes are high and the penalties for failure are immense, as we saw many times in the war games. We don't argue that conflict is inevitable. However, we do say that conflict is possible given the Chinese military buildup and nationalist rhetoric. The war game built on our previous U.S.-China conventional war game. This project added nuclear elements, updated the war game for a 2028 timeframe, and then ran the game 15 times. It's a physical game with 4 boards and about 1,000 pieces, so before anyone asks, no, you can't buy a copy, it's too complicated for general use. Our game participants had expertise in regional affairs, military operations, and nuclear strategy, many at the senior level, but gameplay represented their individual perspectives, not the policies or plans of the U.S. government. We put participants in the role of operational commanders with the latitude to recommend nuclear use and negotiated settlements. There was no requirement to use nuclear weapons, and teams often did not. However, sometimes they did. The most important finding was that participants resorted to nuclear weapons when they thought they were losing the conventional war. This happened most frequently with the China team as their invasion of Taiwan faltered due to lack of supplies. Second, we found that when teams used nuclear weapons, they used a lot. One nuclear weapon might have a political effect, but many are needed to change the battlefield balance. Third, sometimes the U.S. team panicked as a result of the large initial losses. Over time, the U.S. position gets better as reinforcements arrive, but the first 2 weeks are hard. And finally, not surprisingly, attacks on an adversary's population always engendered retaliation against one's own population. Also important were things that we thought we would find, but didn't. We thought that conventional attacks on targets on the Chinese mainland would provoke China to a nuclear response. They didn't, because China teams did not want to risk nuclear escalation. We thought that U.S. nuclear superiority would cause the China teams to hesitate before using nuclear weapons. They didn't. As long as the China team thought they had a secure second strike, they felt free to use nuclear weapons. And we thought that nuclear weapons would be used extensively at sea because of the absence of collateral damage. They weren't, because the weapons in each inventory turned out to be unsuitable for that kind of use. There are always caveats to these studies. The key caveat here is that we did not fully represent the political dimensions of decision-making, so the frequency of nuclear use in the games does not necessarily reflect what might happen in the real world. It does give insights, though, into the dynamics of nuclear decision-making. So what can the United States do to deter such a conflict or to bring it to a successful conclusion? Our primary recommendation is to prepare off-ramps to achieve key objectives but provide a face-saving exit for China. If it comes to nuclear use, focus on operational targets. Striking Chinese nuclear forces or cities leads to disaster. Accustom decision-makers to the high losses of a great power conflict through wargaming and exercises. And finally, engage Japan and other allies in discussions on nuclear dynamics and scenarios. Even if they are not directly involved, they need to be ready for what might happen around them. To read the full report, Confronting Armageddon, Wargaming Nuclear Deterrence and Its Failures in a U.S.-China Conflict over Taiwan, please visit csis.org.